Good night. If you're here, chances are you're tired. Maybe your body feels a little heavier today. Maybe your mind doesn't want to shut down. That's okay. You don't have to do anything. Just lie down and listen. This is the beginning of an old story, and at the same time, very much yours. The title: The Duel That Changed the Destiny of Egypt, Horus versus Set. That's what you're about to hear. A war between gods, yes, but with pain so human that it's sometimes funny. If it makes you feel good, if it calms you down, consider signing up here. Only if you want to, of course. No rush, no pressure. Now, if you can, turn off the lights. Put your phone away. You don't need to see anything. You don't need to pay attention to everything. The story will happen anyway. Just let your thoughts flow, like sand through your fingers. Ancient Egypt was more than pyramids and pharaohs. It was a world organized around one idea: Ma'at, order, justice, balance. Things had a place. The sky above, the Nile River, running like a lung, and the gods watching over it all, with an almost unsettling calm. At that time, Osiris ruled. You've heard that name before. He was just serene, almost too calm. The kind of leader who seems invisible, because everything just works. The harvest comes, the people sing, the temple fills with incense. Life goes on smoothly, until someone decides it's too boring. Set, Osiris's brother, a god of the desert, of violence, of storms. But before all that, he was just a brother who wanted to be seen, not as a shadow, but as a king. And you know, envy in a family is like sand in your shoe. It bothers you all the time, even if no one says anything. You are there, observing everything from the outside, but at the same time, from the inside, you feel the discomfort in the air, the heavenly dinner table with awkward silences. Isis, Osiris' wife, notices. Osiris does not. He believes that love is enough, that a brother would never betray him. That blood is stronger than power. He was wrong. Set hatches a plan, one that only someone with a lot of free time and a lot of resentment could imagine. He builds a custom-made, beautiful, luxurious coffin, promising to give it as a gift to whoever fits perfectly inside. A silly little game, until Osiris lies down and never gets up again. Set closes the lid, seals it with lead, throws his brother's body into the Nile. Egypt trembles, and the order cracks. It's strange how the fall of one person can turn into the collapse of everything, right? Harmony collapses with just one gesture. Isis runs away, carrying a pain that has no name. The loss of her husband, the fear, and secret growing inside her. You're still there, closer to Isis now. You see the goddess wandering the marshes of the delta. She's not crying, at least not in an obvious way, but the silence around her is heavy. Something is brewing, not just a plan, a child. Horus is born hidden, a baby among the reeds, surrounded by snakes and shadows. No golden cradle, no palace, just a mother trying to protect what was left of hope. You may remember being born into a world of confusion too, of not understanding anything, but feeling that there was something waiting for you, something that needed to be fixed, even if you didn't know how. Meanwhile, Set rules, tall, arrogant, cruel, but also insecure, because deep down he knows something about that victory was too wrong to last. Before the confrontation, before the chaos, Egypt lived in a different light. The banks of the Nile were like breathing. With each flood, The water rose as if bringing a gift. With each ebb, the earth gave thanks, making room for seeds and crops. The people walked barefoot, respecting an ancient rhythm, trusting that the world obeyed an invisible order. This order had a name, Maat. Maat was not just a goddess. She was the beginning, the invisible thread that held everything together. The balance between what is born and what dies, between what is built and what is destroyed. The idea was simple. If everyone does their part, the whole will remain. But of course, simple does not mean easy. At the center of this world was Osiris, tall, calm-faced, with a precisely braided beard. He was not a warrior, he was a guardian. Osiris ruled with serene firmness, as if he did not need to shout to be heard. Under his rule, Egypt flourished. The fields grew, the canals irrigated, and the temples were filled with perfumes and chants. Osiris did not demand fear. He inspired confidence. But like all light, he cast a shadow. And that shadow had a name, Set. Set was Osiris's brother. Not smaller, not less powerful, just different. Where Osiris walked with patience, Set moved with momentum. Where Osiris sought harmony, Set felt restlessness. He was the god of the desert, of storms, of that which escapes control. At first, the two lived together. There was even respect. But resentment is like a crack in an ancient statue. It starts out invisible, and one day, without warning, everything collapses. Set saw in his brother not only a leader, but a barrier, a constant reminder of everything he was not, and perhaps never would be. Nobody talked about it, but everyone felt it. Isis, Osiris's wife, noticed it too. Intelligent, devout, mistress of secrets. She saw the discomfort in Set's eyes when the people applauded Osiris. She saw the tightness in his gestures, the words that stuck in his throat. But Osiris, no. He believed that goodness sustained itself, that love was enough, and it's curious, because even balance, when it ignores imbalance, feeds tragedy. In those days, Egypt did not know that it was the end of an era. Scribes recorded the cycles of the moon, priests prepared offerings, and people lined up in the markets as usual. Nothing seemed wrong, but time was already breaking. Even if no one noticed, Set, there, watching everything, he walked through the desert as if he were at home. He knew where the winds changed, where the sand swallowed footprints. The desert was his soul, vast, dry, unstable, and inside him something grew that even he didn't quite understand. Was it anger? Was it envy? Was it the desire to exist without being anyone's shadow? Maybe it was all that. Maybe it was just fear. Osiris continued to reign. He visited cities, instructed priests, and planted ideas of justice. But every gesture of kindness seemed to Set like another provocation. Every compliment to his brother was a wound. The power that Set wanted seemed unattainable as long as Osiris was there, smiling with that irritating peace. And then, in silence, the plan began to take shape. Set didn't just want to take the throne. He wanted to erase his brother's presence from history, to replace admiration with fear, to make his people bow down, not out of respect, but out of lack of choice. It was a cold, meticulous plan, shrouded in ritual and vanity. Meanwhile, Egypt slept peacefully. The stars were still in the sky. Canals carried water to the fields. Children played among the columns of the temples. Nothing seemed out of place. And that is exactly where the danger blooms. In the silence, before the break, Osiris did not see. Isis saw, but could not stop it. And Set waited. It was the end of a golden age, but no one knew it. There was still time. Not much, but there was time. Time for one last sunrise before everything began to fall apart. And even now, in this comfortable distance between listener and story, you can feel it. That something is approaching. That the wind has changed. That the balance, so revered, is about to fall. But not now. Now, Egypt still dreams. The day came without fanfare. The sky over the Nile was the same. The markets were full. The drums sounded slow, as always. But Set woke up different. Today, he would wait no longer. The plan was ready. It was not a direct attack. It would not be a war. It would be a party. A public celebration in honor of Osiris, organized by Set. A gesture of brotherhood, they said. A gesture of reconciliation. Even Osiris believed it. He arrived smiling. The crowd applauded. Isis at his side, elegant and attentive. Set welcomed everyone with enthusiasm. Toasts, music, dancing, a banquet. But at the center of the celebration, there was something new. A box, a luxurious sarcophagus made of rare wood, studded with gold and stones. So beautiful that it seemed made by divine hands. Set showed it to everyone and said, "I made it for the one who fits perfectly inside, a gift for the lucky one who has the exact measurements." The guests laughed. Curious, they approached one by one. They went in, tested it. Everyone was almost, just almost, until Osiris accepted the invitation. Smiling, he lay down in the box. It wrapped him precisely. It was custom made, exactly for him. Then, in a quick, brutal movement, Set closed the lid. Nails, molten lead, not a word. The guards, accomplices, sealed the box. The laughter stopped. The air changed. Isis screamed, but it was too late. The sarcophagus was dragged, thrown into the Nile, and the river, as if understanding gravity, carried it away without haste, silently, obediently. At that moment, Egypt trembled, not by earthquake, but by absence. The air grew heavier. The sun, duller. Osiris had disappeared, and with him, order. Set did not wait for morning. He ascended the throne. He declared himself king, and began a new reign. Drier, harder. The people looked at the ground. The priests hesitated in their chants, and Isis disappeared. She left in silence, without taking any gold, without making any speeches. She only took her pain, and a reminder. Osiris was not dead. Not yet. Gods do not die like men. They disappear. They fragment. They hide in time. Isis knew this, and she knew he needed to be found, rebuilt, honored. Set, however, feared no return. To him, Osiris was the past, and Isis, a shadow. The present was his, and the power too. But even in silence, Osiris's absence spoke loudly. The fields began to dry. The Nile's floods became erratic. The people murmured. Something was wrong. Something essential had been broken. In the desert, Set celebrated alone, cheered out of fear, not love. He had won, but it tasted strange. No crowds brought peace. No throne felt comfortable. And somewhere in his mind, he knew Isis had not given up, and the Nile, that old silent god, hid more than secrets. Meanwhile, Isis wandered. She disguised herself. She talked to trees. She slept on rocks. She asked the wind. Each step was a whisper towards the impossible. But gods have time, and she had a mission, to find the body, to reborn hope. You can imagine this quest, not as a heroic adventure, but as a morning in motion, a woman walking among forgotten temples, carrying longing like someone carrying a clay jar, fragile, but full. And one day, she found it, on the bank of a distant river, near a solitary tree, the sarcophagus, covered in slime, quiet. But there, Isis wept, not in despair, in recognition. The pain was finally eased into action. She opened the box. She touched the body. She felt that Osiris was still pulsing, even though he was not breathing, and the world breathed with her. But return was not yet possible. The body needed to be protected, hidden, reunited, and there was more danger lurking. Set knew, he felt, and furious, he pursued Isis. He found the body. He tore it apart. He divided it into pieces. He scattered them all over Egypt, as if to say, it is not enough to kill. We must erase. But Isis did not give up. One by one, she picked up the pieces, with the help of Nephthys, her sister, and Anubis, the god of the dead. Together, they remade Osiris. Not the body, but the symbol. And the symbol was enough. From this ritual of mourning and power, something else would be born. A child, an heir, and with him, the war yet to come. But for now, all that existed was silence. The silence after the betrayal, the silence between the end and the beginning. And in that silence, Egypt waited. In the heart of the swamp, far from the eyes of gods and men, Isis hid. The world she knew had changed. The throne was stained. The temple was empty. And justice, gone like the body of Osiris. But inside her, something new was moving. The pregnancy was not announced with trumpets. There were no offerings, no celebrations. It was silent, fragile, almost secret, like a candle burning in the darkness. Isis knew she could trust no one. Set was hunting her. All of Egypt seemed under surveillance. But here, among the reeds, there was room for hope. She built a shelter of leaves and silence. She slept with one eye open. She ate the barest of foods. She protected her belly with her hands. And every night, she whispered promises to the growing child. You will restore balance. You will remember who your father was. His name would be Horus. He was not born in a palace. He had no golden cradle, no crowns, no oaths. He was born surrounded by insects, shadows, and humid winds. And he was born strong. His eyes were alert, like someone who already knows the world. Isis held him firmly. And in that moment, he felt that Osiris was still there. In part, in the form of a seed. Horus's childhood was not peaceful. He grew up among threats. The animals of the swamp were his neighbors. Snakes, crocodiles, scorpions. But Isis was a fierce mother. Every creature that dared to approach was driven away with ancient spells, words whispered in forgotten languages. Isis knew the secret names of everything. And with that, she protected her son. Still, the fear was constant. Every sound in the night seemed to be a spy from Set. Every shadow among the branches brought the possibility of death. Horus had no toys. He had silences. He did not learn songs. He learned to be silent, but he also learned to watch, to listen to the wind, to read the marks left by the gods on the banks of the Nile. He grew quickly. His shoulders took shape. His voice became firm. But inside, there were still questions. Why did my father die? He asked. And Isis answered, with eyes full of the past. Because the world needs fixing, and that fixing will come through you. Horus didn't know what it was to be a god. He knew what it was to be angry. He knew what it was to miss someone he'd never met. He knew that somewhere there was a throne that belonged to him, and a man sitting on it, smiling with false teeth. And even without formal training, Horus was beginning to understand who he was. The birds followed him. The sky seemed brighter when he looked up. He dreamed of hawks. He dreamed of flying over the desert, watching everything from above, and of Set, on the ground, trying to hide from the clutches of fate. Sometimes Isis wept in secret, not out of weakness, but because she knew what was to come. Creating a god for war is like sharpening a blade you love. One day, she would have to let him go, and the world would change, once again. But not yet. For now, Horus trained with what he had. He fought against the wind. He ran among the rocks. He learned spells by listening to Isis sing to the water. He was a warrior in training, a king in exile, a boy with the weight of the world on his shoulders. Without knowing exactly what that meant, Set, far away, continued to reign. His throne was made of stone. His decisions were impatient. He had no children. He had no heirs. He had power and fear. A fear he would not admit. A fear that grew with rumors. They said that Isis still lived, that an heir had been born, that the order had not died. It was just waiting for the right time, and that time was approaching. Deep in the swamp, Horus dreamed more and more of battles, of justice, of revenge, and of a golden throne illuminated by the desert sun. Time did not run fast, but it ran right. Each day, hidden, was a step towards the inevitable, and Isis knew the silence would soon be broken. Horus did not have a childhood like the gods usually have. There were no miniature thrones, nor offerings left in his honor. He grew up not surrounded by worship, but by silence. Every step he took was a hidden step. Every sound he made, a risk. His name was known, yes, but only by those who knew how to keep it. Isis, his mother, lived in a state of vigil. She slept lightly, with one ear always attentive to the swamp. She protected Horus with whispered spells, hanging amulets and long looks, as if she wanted to memorize every moment. The boy was her mission, her answer, her delayed revenge. The hiding place was not a comfortable place. It was damp, cramped, and full of insects, but it was safe, the least security a morning goddess could offer. And Horus, even as a small child, already understood that the world around him was hostile. There was no naivety in his eyes, only a constant curiosity and a silent anger that grew along with his bones. He didn't ask much, he observed. Isis, on the other hand, didn't tell him everything, just what was necessary, enough for the boy to know that there was a debt to be collected, that his father, Osiris, had been betrayed, and that Set, the current king, did not reign by right, but by mistake, a mistake that needed to be corrected. Sometimes Horus would hear Set's name being mentioned among the winds, sometimes in a tone of fear, sometimes in bitter whispers of revolt. He did not know exactly who this man was, but he hated him, not for having the throne, but for having extinguished the light of the father he had never known. The swamp was his training ground. No masters, no fancy weapons, just stones, sticks, reflections in the water, and lessons in survival. Isis taught him simple but effective spells, protection against snakes, against poisons, against unwanted glances. He learned quickly, like someone who knew by instinct that time was short, and he was beaten many times by animals, by plants, by his own exhaustion. But he never cried. He just looked at his mother and said, "I'm ready." And she smiled sadly. She knew he wasn't. She knew he was still just a boy trying to be a god. Still, there was tenderness, a caring gesture here, a night song there, Isis did not want her son to grow up with nothing but hate. She tried to teach him beauty in the little things, the reflection of the moon in the water, the sound of frogs in the distance, the patience of the trees. But the world around him was no help, and Horus, more and more, became an arrow pointing towards the future. He was smart. He could sense his mother's mood swings. He could sense when fear was approaching. He learned to be quiet at the right moments, to disappear. It was as if he was training to become a legend, even if he didn't want to. Once, snake bit him. It was poisonous. The pain came quickly, and his body began to weaken. Isis became desperate. She cried out for help to the oldest gods, those deities who do not speak, but listen. And Thoth answered. The god of wisdom appeared silently. He healed the boy with ancient words and a light touch. Then he looked at Isis and said, "He still has much to do." And he disappeared. It was the first time Horus saw another god other than his mother, and he understood that he was not alone, that there was something greater watching him. It was not comfort. It was a mission, and missions are not chosen. Meanwhile, Set ruled. He grew more and more paranoid. He knew that Isis still lived. He knew the rumors. And he sensed the danger. He sensed spies, priests, men who claimed to be pious, but who sought only clues. None returned with answers. The swamp, it seemed, was beyond reach. But time was not. It passed, and Horus grew, not in luxury, but in conviction. He was no longer a boy. His arms were gaining strength, his gaze, firmness, and in his dreams, the desert appeared more and more clearly. Set, seated on his throne, and he, Horus, with open wings, ready to fly or attack. Childhood came to an end, without celebration, without transition, only with the certainty that the world outside needed to be confronted, and that he, even though he didn't know exactly how, would be responsible for that. The day came when Horus could hide no longer. The swamp no longer contained him. Neither did his body nor his mission. The silence in which he had grown up now weighed heavily upon him. It was time to come out, to face the world that had been shaped without him, to claim what had been denied him before he was even born. Isis knew this moment would come, but when Horus announced that he would go to the gods, she did not cry. She just nodded. There were no more lessons to teach, only the hope that everything that had been planted would germinate when it was needed. He left as if opening a door that had been locked for centuries. The court of the gods was far from the world of men, above the Nile, above the pyramids, beyond the desert, a suspended space where time and space lost their importance. There, the great gathered, not to fight, but to decide. And this time, the matter was serious. The succession to the throne of Egypt. Ra stood in the center. The sun god, too ancient to be moved, too powerful to be ignored. Around him, a constellation of deities. Thoth, the scribe, who wrote everything down without looking up. Nephthys, who watched with regret. Hathor, serene as ever. And among them all, Set, standing, with the posture of a king, as if he had already won. When Horus entered, the atmosphere changed. It was not an obvious change. No thunder, no brightness, just a slight discomfort, as if the gods realized they were facing something inevitable. Horus did not shout. He did not plead. He did not threaten. He simply said, "I am the son of Osiris, and the throne of Egypt belongs to me." Ra remained silent for a moment. Then he looked at Set. Set smiled. A toothy smile. He said Horus was too young, inexperienced, emotional, a child spoiled by a resentful mother. He said the throne required strength, strategy, dominance, and that he, Set, had proven that by holding Egypt together in times of trouble. The court murmured. Some gods agreed. Others hesitated. Horus stood firm. He did not argue. He let the silence work for him. It was then that Set proposed a series of challenges. If he wants the throne, let him prove himself worthy. Ra, undecided, accepted. The gods, despite their immortal nature, loved tests. They liked to see how mortals and demigods dealt with the impossible. Isis, who had been silently watching her son, did not interfere, but fear grew within her, not of Horus's failure, but of the possibility that the gods might be enchanted by Set's brutality, because often that is what happens. The first challenge was simple, a boat race on the Nile, but with one ironic condition. The boats had to be made of stone. Set, with his impatient way, threw a vessel carved from black stone into the river, which slowly sank, but still moved by pure force of magic. Horus did something unexpected. He took wood. He covered it with white plaster. He pretended it was stone. The gods laughed. Set, furious, accused him of trickery. But Thoth smiled discreetly. Cunning, after all, is also a form of strength. Other tests came. Disguises, ambushes, symbolic duels. Set tried to intimidate. Horus resisted, but the balance did not tip easily. Ra seemed divided. Some days he found Horus worthy. On others, he admired Set's imposing presence. After all, chaos is also part of the world. And if you were there, you might also doubt. You would see two gods, one with battle scars, the other with the eyes of someone who carries a legacy. Which one deserves more? Who has more right? The one who sits on the throne, or the one who was born to it? The court continued, unhurriedly. The time of the gods is slow, but Horus felt it. Each test took him further away from himself. It was as if, little by little, he stopped being the son of Osiris and became just a symbol, a project of a king. Isis watched, in silence. Every now and then, she glanced at Thoth, as if asking him to write everything down carefully, that the story would be told properly later, that the world would not forget who her son was, even if the gods hesitated to acknowledge him. The trial was not yet over, but the tension was already spreading. The gods, once distant, were now whispering, and among the whispers, something was beginning to change. With the court divided, Set realized he needed more than words to keep his throne. He needed a show, to prove, in front of all the gods, that Horus was unworthy, that he was weak, impulsive, vulnerable, not with logic, but with trickery. And at this, Set was a master. He began to propose increasingly absurd challenges, not to test his ability, but to unsettle him. He wanted to expose Horus to ridicule, and if possible, to lead him into error. After all, a slip-up in front of the gods could be more fatal than a sword. The first of these challenges was comical at first glance. Both had to transform themselves into hippos and remain submerged in the Nile for 3 days and 3 nights. Whoever emerged first would lose. It was a game of endurance, but also of pride, and for Set, an opportunity to hide in his own brute strength. Horus accepted. He turned into a hippopotamus. He dove. The river swallowed them. The surface became calm. Isis, watching the scene, could not contain her maternal instinct. She saw her son sink and feared for his life. She took a magic spear and went to the shore. She waited. Time passed. When she saw a shadow under the water, she shot, she hit. But it was not Set. It was Horus. He emerged wounded, frustrated. He yelled at his mother. He accused her of weakness. You protect me so much that you get in my way. Isis, silent, lowered her eyes. She did not apologize. She knew that the pain was speaking there, not her son. Set, on the other side, laughed. He had succeeded. He had destabilized Horus's strongest bond. He had created a crack, and with that, he moved forward without lifting a finger. In the courtroom, the gods whispered. Some thought Horus's behavior was childish. Others understood, but everyone was divided. The truth was that no one liked difficult decisions, and the more time passed, the more Ra hesitated. Set, realizing the effectiveness of his traps, decided to be bolder. He invited Horus for a private conversation, a gesture of false diplomacy. He suggested that, instead of fighting for the throne in court, they should settle the matter between themselves, as brothers, in peace. Horus accepted. That night, Set offered food, wine, and a soothing speech. He said that perhaps they could share the throne. That eternal conflict would only weaken Egypt. And Horus, tired of tests, of trials, of uncertainty, wanted to believe. For the first time, he let his guard down. But Set was not made of peace. During the night, he tried to rape Horus, not with weapons, but with humiliation. A symbolic, physical, intimate attack. He wanted to dishonor him, reduce him to something fragile, inferior, and thus destroy his legitimacy. But Horus fought back. He resisted. He tricked his uncle. He returned the trap with another. He collected Set's seed and hid it. Then he spread his own portions of cunning into the food that Set consumed. A trap within a trap. In court, the case came to light. The gods were shocked. Not by the act itself, they were accustomed to excesses, but by the subtlety of the clash. Isis, once again, intervened. She went to Thoth. She asked him to examine the bodies, to reveal the truth. Thoth, with his exacting methods, found what he was looking for. Horus's semen inside Set. Symbolically, Horus had dominated his uncle. It was a masterstroke. The gods laughed. Some were astonished, but the narrative was bent. Set had tried to use shame. He received shame in return. But even so, Ra hesitated. It was impressive how the time of the gods, however vast, seemed not to be enough for simple decisions. With each trap, with each test, the truth seemed further away, and Horus, increasingly, became someone less naive. Set's traps were not just physical tricks. They were moral tests, attempts to corrupt his nephew's character, and in part, they were working. Horus was beginning to lose his patience, to act on impulse, to doubt his own mission. But Isis watched. Silently, he knew that the war was far from over, and that Horus's greatest enemy might not be Set, but wear and tear. The court continued. The trials continued. But something in the air had already changed. Set, once confident, began to repeat his tricks. Horus, increasingly suspicious, learned from each defeat. The scales had not yet tipped, but the ground was slowly beginning to move. After so many symbolic disputes, traps and ambushes, the inevitable remained: physical combat. No words would solve it. No judgment would be enough. The tension that was building up in the court of the gods now required another language, that of the body, that of strength, that of struggle. Set was the first to propose. Enough of abstract proofs. Let us fight, like warriors, Let the strongest rule, and the gods, tired of circular debates, agreed, not out of justice, but out of exhaustion. It was easier to let fists decide than words. The field was chosen far away, among forgotten dunes and ancient rocks, a place without temples, without human witnesses, only the sky, the wind, and the silence of the desert, a neutral space so that no god could claim an advantage. The night before the battle, Horus did not sleep, not out of fear, but out of restlessness. He had been trained in the swamp, among shadows and snakes, not for ceremonial fighting, but for survival. Still, he carried doubt, as if winning meant not only defeating the enemy, but proving, perhaps to himself, that he was truly a king. Isis watched him from a distance. She knew she could no longer intervene. She knew that this moment was his alone. She did not pray. She did not ask for protection. She simply looked up at the sky and whispered, "May the scales tip by merit and not by trickery." When the two reached the field, the air seemed to stop. Horus on one side, Set on the other. Neither of them spoke. There was no longer any need. Every word would be wasted. The eyes said it all. Set advanced first, impulsive as always. He used a spear made of storm. He moved with anger, with speed. Horus retreated, not out of fear, but out of strategy. He bided his time. He knew his uncle's style, direct, brutal, but not very patient. The first impact was sharp. Sand flew. Horus staggered. Blood ran from his mouth, but he stood. He advanced. He attacked, and for the first time, Set felt pain. The fight wasn't pretty. It was raw, like two ancient forces trying to push the world in opposite directions. Horus was technique, precision, resilience. Set was chaos, brute force, uncontrollable fury. The battle lasted for hours, maybe days. Time there did not follow the same rhythms as the world. The gods watched from afar, some in silence, others in expectation. Ra, still undecided, kept his face still. In the midst of the fight, Horus fell. Set took advantage. He stepped on him. He shouted. He called the gods to witness. Look, the heir of Osiris, fallen to the ground like a child. But Horus, on the ground, closed his eyes. He took a deep breath, and with a sudden blow, he pulled Set by the legs. He unbalanced him. The two rolled in the sand, in a cloud of dust and hatred. It was at that moment that something changed. Horus no longer fought for justice or for rights. He fought for dignity, for the memory of his father, for his own existence, and that gave him strength. Set felt. The fighting intensified. Weapons broke. Sand mixed with blood. The bodies no longer seemed divine. They were made of pain and exhaustion. Until, on impulse, Set tore out part of Horus's eye. A brutal blow. Precise. Almost final. The world fell silent. Horus staggered back. He felt the loss. But he did not fall. He stood, one eye open, the other empty. And yet, he advanced, furiously, calmly, with everything he had learned in exile. The counterattack was simple. One accurate hit. Set fell, for the first time, defeated. Not destroyed, but defeated. Horus did not celebrate. He just walked away. He looked at the sky, then at the court, and he waited. The gods descended in silence. They surrounded the two. Ra said nothing for a while. He just watched. Then, in a low voice, he said, "The strength has been demonstrated, but the decision has not yet been made." Horus lowered his head. He knew the fight did not end there. That violence, however just, was never enough to convince the undecided. Set lay on the ground, humiliated, but alive. The war was not over, but now, The world was no longer the same. After the battle, the bodies rested, but the fight did not. Not even the injuries interrupted the game that dragged on between Horus and Set. And when physical strength showed its limits, the gods returned to the old ways, that of transformation, that of cunning, that of magic. Set, now humiliated, sought alternatives. He no longer trusted his own strength. He decided to resort to what was less visible and more dangerous. He assumed different forms. At night, he was a black pig that roamed the fields in search of signs of Horus. During the day, he was a storm with eyes. No one knew when it was him. Not even the gods dared to say for sure. Horus, in turn, learned to respond. He began to practice his own metamorphoses. He became a hawk, a wind, a flame. Each form required mastery, patience, and pain. His body stretched, bent, and reconfigured itself. It was like being born and dying several times in a single day. But he endured, because he knew his enemy was doing the same. Isis watched everything from afar. She could no longer prevent the clashes, but she was still present. She watched her son with eyes that mixed pride and mourning. The boy she had hidden among the reeds was now dueling in animal form, waging a war that would never end. And she knew this was not just about power, it was about identity. The gods, both curious and exhausted, saw in the transformations a new form of competition. They did not judge as before. They watched. They commented, like someone watching a game that got out of control. One day, Horus transformed himself into a falcon and flew to a sacred spot in the desert. There, he would meet Set in his new form, a fierce red antelope with gleaming horns. The clash was brief and violent, claws against hooves, speed against brutality, but there was no victor. Both fell exhausted, slowly returning to their original form. That's when Isis decided to step in. She knew that defeating Set required more than strength or shape-shifting. She needed to understand what he feared, and deep down, Set feared one thing: being seen. The following night, Isis disguised herself. She took the form of an elderly peasant woman. She was bent over, frail, and had a trembling voice. She approached Set, who was wandering in human form along the banks of the Nile. He did not recognize her. He asked her who she was. She said she had a son, and that this son had been wronged, stolen by a cruel man who had taken his land. Set listened to the story with curiosity. He laughed and replied, "If he is the son of a legitimate man, then let him fight. If he wins, he deserves it. If he loses, he does not." Isis then returned to her divine form. She looked at him sternly. She said only, "Thank you for the confirmation." Set remained silent. He had been deceived, and worse, he had revealed his logic to the gods themselves. In court, Isis recounted what had happened. He said that not even Set himself believed he had the right to the throne by birth, only by force. Ra, once again, hesitated, but the weight of the revelation was too great to ignore. Set, furious at the emotional ambush, decided to go even further. He planned something cowardly. He waited for Horus to fall asleep. He turned into a shadow. He slipped into his nephew's tent and attacked. He cruelly tore out his nephew's eye. Then he disappeared into the wind, leaving only pain and emptiness. Horus woke up screaming. The eye that saw the world, that read intentions, was gone. It was more than physical pain. It was the feeling of having lost a part of himself. Isis found him kneeling, covered in blood. She did not cry. She gently touched his face and said, "This is not over yet." Then Thoth appeared. Called by his mother, the god of wisdom came silently. He surveyed the wound. He took fragments of the fallen eye. He mixed them with ancient words: breath, dust, light, and slowly he rebuilt the eye of Horus, not as it was before, but better. An eye that saw beyond flesh, a symbol of healing, of rebirth. The scar remained, but Horus did not hide it. He used it as a mark, as a reminder that even gods bleed, and that true power is not in not getting hurt, but in coming back whole anyway. The transformations would continue. The magic would not cease. But now, there was an additional symbol in this dispute, an eye that saw everything, that guarded the past, and watched over the future. The blow did not come on the battlefield, nor in ceremony, nor under the gaze of the gods. It came treacherously. At a time when war seemed to give way to fatigue, Horus had retreated to rest, an ordinary day between endless battles. The body exhausted, the mind in torpor. It was at that moment that Set attacked. He didn't scream, he didn't call. He just appeared, like a shadow, like a dry wind, like an aggressive presence. Horus barely had time to react. The first blow was a push that threw him to the ground. The second, straight to the face. And before any divine intervention could happen, Set stuck his fingers in his left eye and ripped it out. Horus's scream cut through the silence like a blade. The world seemed to freeze. The air stilled. The sands fell silent. And the sky, for the first time in ages, grew dark before its time. Set disappeared, taking what he had taken, a trophy, proof that he still had control, that Horus's victory would not be so simple, and perhaps a reminder to the gods that chaos cannot be banished without fighting dirty. Horus was later found, lying on the sand. His body was shaking, his empty eye was bleeding, but he did not cry. He could not. Crying takes more strength than it looks, and he had none left. Isis arrived first. Always her. She didn't scream. She didn't despair. She sat down next to her son and held him as she had done when he was a boy. Her pain was not that of someone who sees a wound. It was that of someone who already knew that it would happen one day and that there was no way to stop it. The gods came next, slowly, as if arriving late, but trying to appear attentive. None offered help. None knew what to do, until Thoth appeared. The god of wisdom, always calm, knelt down. He looked at the wound carefully. He collected what he could from the remains of the eye. He gathered sand, saliva, leaves. He whispered forgotten words. He performed a ritual without haste, as if he understood that rebuilding is more important than rushing. It wasn't just a cure, it was a new beginning. Thoth fashioned a new eye. He used not only matter, but memory. He put into it everything Horus had learned, every pain, every mistake, every doubt. When he was finished, the result was more than an organ. It was a symbol. It was total vision. The eye of Horus was born. When Horus opened his eyes, something was different. He saw more than he had before. He saw the gods as they were. He saw the weight of his own choices. He saw that his enemy, Set, despite his cruelty, also carried fear, a fear as old as he was. But above all, he saw that the throne was not the ultimate prize. It was merely the consequence of something greater. Justice, perhaps, or reparation. The other gods watched in silence. The new eye shone with a calm, steady light that made them slightly uncomfortable. It was like being seen completely. No filters, no myths, and nobody likes that. Set, upon learning of Horus's recovery, laughed, a short, joyless laugh. He kept the torn-out eye as a relic, but he felt it. Victory had slipped through his fingers. What was supposed to be humiliation became a symbol, and symbols last longer than wounds. From that day on, Horus was no longer just the heir of Osiris. He became something new, a marked warrior, a scarred god. And that inspired, people began to wear the eye as an amulet, as protection, as a reminder that even the strong fall, but they also rise. The court of the gods hesitated once more. The balance tipped, but time was running out, and even the immortals knew a decision had to be made. Meanwhile, Horus rested, not in body, but in spirit. For the first time in a long time, he felt calm. He knew he didn't need to prove anything anymore. The lost eye, the recovered eye, and everything he had learned in between were enough. Isis watched him from afar. Now, without concern, with respect, he had crossed the line between son and warrior, between promise and reality, and even without words, she knew the end was near, and he would be the one to write the last lines of this dispute. The new eye was not just a disguised scar. It was something else. It was a landmark, the symbol of a god who had been shattered and reassembled. Not the same as he had been before, but more whole. Paradoxically, Horus had been different ever since. No longer the eager young man who wanted to prove his worth, but someone who had finally come to understand the weight of what he carried. The eye of Horus began to shine discreetly, a steady blue light that did not dazzle, but penetrated. He could see better now, not only what was in front of him, but also what was hidden behind the gestures and silences. He saw that many gods in the court did not want to commit themselves, that the throne was an idea as unstable as the desert, and that Set was not only his enemy, he was also a reflection of something that existed in everyone there. The healing of the eye was celebrated by few. Officially, no god congratulated him. But in the shadows, the signs were clear. Amulets began to appear with the design of the eye. Younger priests whispered prayers in his name. Fishermen left offerings on the banks of the Nile, hoping for good luck. Horus began to stop being just a character in dispute and became a symbol. Thoth, the healer, kept his distance. He demanded no recognition. His work was done, but every now and then, he would watch Horus from afar, with the look of someone who already knows the end of the story, and yet appreciates every detail along the way. Set, on the other hand, felt the weight of the change. He tried to maintain his poise. He proposed new tests, invented ways to prolong the trial, but the aura of dominance began to crumble. His figure no longer inspired respect, only weariness. Even so, he insisted, and Horus accepted. But now it was different. Before, each challenge was a test of survival. Now, it was almost a ritual, a cycle that needed to be ended calmly, not for revenge, but for justice. Set once tried to taunt Horus. "Do you think this new eye makes you better than me? Do you think pain has elevated you?" Horus simply replied, "It has not made me better, but it has made me see you." Set didn't understand, or he chose not to understand. The court finally seemed to move, not out of decision, but out of exhaustion. The gods began to comment among themselves. "There is nothing left to prove. Time watches us. The people need a king." But Ra was still silent. Horus, now with his new eye, began to visit the people in secret. He walked through the fields, the markets, the boats. He did not say he was a god. He just observed. He listened to stories. He saw the hunger, the contained hope, and he understood that the throne was less about glory and more about responsibility. Isis, always in the background, watched this process with a certain maternal detachment, proud but silent. She no longer needed to protect. She only needed to accompany. And this, for a goddess who lived in the shadow of loss, was almost liberating. On the eve of what would be the final judgment, Horus slept little, but not out of anxiety. He dreamed of Osiris. His father, with his calm face, appeared among columns of light. He said nothing. He just extended his hand. Horus touched it and woke up. He felt that something inside him had aligned, that he was ready. The next morning, the court met once more. The chairs of the gods were filled, but their eyes were weary. No new tests were proposed. No traps. No spells. Horus stood silently. He had no need to speak. The eye spoke for him. Ra finally looked at everyone, and for the first time in a long time, he looked tired. He said, "Egypt needs balance, and balance comes not through strength, but through wisdom. Horus has shown both." And then, for the first time, Ra nodded. The approval did not come with trumpets, nor with divine light. It came with a slight nod, a small gesture that said, "It is done." And it was. Horus did not smile. He simply lowered his eyes, as if accepting, but without euphoria. He knew that the road to the throne began there. It did not end. The eye of Horus now belonged not only to him, but to all who looked to him for guidance. And so, the heir of Osiris became the symbol of a new era, an era that knew, to truly see, one must first lose something. No matter how much the court had given its opinion, Set's heart had not accepted it. Ra's decision, even firm, did not convince him. He saw in Horus's acceptance a personal threat, a mirror of what he had never been and would never be. And so, even after the trial, Set demanded more. He demanded the right to the final battle. This time, there would be no tricks, no disguises, no juries, just the two of them, face to face, a settling of scores, a necessary end. The gods, exhausted by long trials, allowed it, perhaps out of resignation, perhaps because they knew that certain disputes only cease when the body can no longer bear it, and the chosen field was the most desolate of all, the deep desert where not even the Nile dared to pass, a place without shade, without sanctuary, without protection. Horus left without ceremony. He took only his staff and his silence. He was in no hurry, nor thirst for blood, just the clear understanding that the end had come. Not the end of the story, but the end of a cycle. And that was necessary. Set was already waiting for him, tall, tense, his face older than before. Time, even on the gods, leaves its mark. He was without armor. He wanted to show that he didn't need it, that he was still the god of the storms, the challenger of order, the last to fall. As they faced each other, there was a moment of pause, as if the desert held its breath. Then came the screams. The fight was direct, raw, no spells, no tricks, just the sound of bodies crashing into the sand, of weapons cutting through the dry wind, of effort dripping in sweat. Horus was precision. Every blow had a destination. Set was explosion. Every movement was a burst of desperation. Dust rose, forming clouds around the two. From above, the gods watched in silence. They did not interfere. They did not comment. This battle was not theirs. It was the battle of the men who had become symbols. It was the past against the future. the loss against the rebuilding. At one point, Horus fell. The staff flew far away. Set advanced, roaring like a beast. But Horus rolled, dodged, grabbed a handful of sand, and threw it at his uncle's eyes. He took advantage of the distraction. A kick, then another. He recovered the staff. They stood up, panting, faces covered in blood and sand. "Why do you insist?" Horus asked, between one blow and another. "You have lost. The throne is no longer yours, because I am Egypt too," Set replied. "Do you think you can erase my part in history just because you lost an eye and earned pity from the gods?" Horus paused. Just for a second, the staff lowered slightly. "I don't want to erase you. I just want you to understand that time doesn't stop because of your pain." Set didn't answer. He advanced furiously, but something inside him was already beginning to crumble. Each blow was weaker, each movement more predictable. The force driving him wasn't conviction, it was resentment, and resentment is tiring. With one final move, Horus disarmed Set. He pointed his staff at his neck. The desert stopped, the wind died, the dust settled, but the final blow did not come. Horus just looked at his uncle and said, "Enough." Set fell to his knees. He did not beg. He did not speak. He simply bowed, and there he stood, not defeated in body, but emptied. Anger no longer found a cause. The throne receded, and he, for the first time in ages, was still. The gods have descended. Ra walked to the center of the field. He looked at the two of them, then at the surrounding desert. He didn't say much, just what was necessary. The era changes today. Horus did not celebrate. He lowered his staff. He turned. He walked away. Set remained there, sitting on the sand, a god who was once a storm, now only silence. And Egypt, far away, was breathing again. The battlefield had calmed down, but the echo of the fighting still vibrated in the air. The desert, silent, seemed to guard the sound of Set's surrender like an ancient secret. The gods returned to their places, and Horus, unhurried, walked back, not like a victorious warrior, but like someone who had finally finished something he had not chosen to start. When he approached the stone temple, where Isis was waiting for him, he stopped for a moment. He took a deep breath. He could feel the marks of war on his body, but in his spirit, something stranger, a kind of emptiness, as if the end would not be as sweet as he had imagined. When Isis saw him, she did not run to meet him. She walked slowly. She touched his face with one hand and his new eye with the other. She said nothing. She just looked at him, as if trying to find the boy she once hid among the reeds. He was still there, but covered by layers of pain, duty, and gods. Inside the temple, there was a decision to be made, not by the gods, but by Isis, by Horus, and strangely, by Set as well. The throne of Egypt was secure. The succession had been recognized. But what to do with Set? The defeated, the usurper, the murderer. Some gods suggested eternal punishment. Others wanted banishment. But Isis wanted something else. She asked that Set be brought before her. And when he arrived, staggering, his face lined, his eyes sunken, there was no arrogance. There was only an old weariness. He did not speak. He waited for his sentence, as one waits for rain in the desert. He knew he deserved the worst, but Isis looked at him with an expression that mixed pain and memory. And then she said, "I could demand your destruction. I could ask that your name be forgotten, but I will not do that. You are part of what we were, part of what we still are. Chaos exists, and to deny that is to create a lie. Set looked up, confused. Horus, beside him, did not hide his surprise, and he also did not hide his discomfort. "He killed my father," he said. "He tried to destroy me. He almost won." Isis nodded. "Yes, and that's why you grew. You learned. You saw what not all gods can see. Egypt needs more than justice. It needs balance." It was hard to accept. Horus felt his pride wounded, not by glory, but by logic. Everything he had faced, all the humiliations to now. Forgive? But Isis continued. Forgiving is not forgetting. It is closing the cycle. It is preventing pain from continuing to dictate our choices. The silence was long. Set didn't answer. He just lowered his head. Maybe out of regret. Maybe out of exhaustion. Maybe because he finally understood that his fight had been against an emptiness inside himself, and not against a nephew. Horus walked away. Not out of anger, but because he needed time. Pride is not just vanity. Sometimes it is a shield, and his was cracked. That night, he stood alone. He climbed a high dune and looked up at the sky. The stars of Egypt, ancient and calm, surrounded him. From up there, everything seemed smaller, even the war, even Set. And there, alone, he allowed himself to feel. He missed his father, his stolen childhood. He felt anger, yes, but also relief. He felt that he had done all he could, but he still existed. And that now? Perhaps it was time to be something new. Not just the son of Osiris, but the king of a new cycle. At dawn, he went down the dune. He found Isis in the temple. She simply said, "I don't fully understand, but I accept." She smiled, a sad but firm smile, like someone who knows that time will take care of the rest. Set was sent to the desert, not as an exile, but as a guardian of the limits, of the winds, of the storms, of the margins of the possible. He would no longer be king, but he would not be forgotten either. And Horus became something that few gods become. Someone who understands that winning is not about dominating. It is about deciding what to do with the power that is given to him. The temple opened to the rising sun. The tall columns, covered in ancient inscriptions, cast long shadows across the stone floor. A reverent silence filled the room. It was not the silence of fear, nor the silence of anticipation. It was the rare kind of silence that accompanies inevitable moments. Horus walked slowly, each step echoing like a reminder of the path he had taken. He wore no armor, nor did he carry any weapons. Only a simple white tunic, trimmed with gold thread. His new eye glowed a deep blue. The gods were waiting for him. The coronation ceremony was not just a ritual. It was the consecration of a cycle that had cost a great deal. A cycle that involved betrayal, death, rebirth, struggle, and forgiveness. And now, there, all of this was transformed into a symbol, into myth, into memory. Ra presided, not as a judge, but as a witness. Beside him, Thoth held the papyrus on which the names would be inscribed. Isis, with unblinking eyes, watched without saying a word. In the background, a statue of Osiris, serene, watched the moment with its eternal silence. Horus knelt before the altar, and then Ra spoke. Today, before gods and men, heaven and earth, past and future, we recognize Horus, legitimate son of Osiris and Isis, as lord of the throne of the two lands. May he bring balance. May he know how to weigh with justice. May he rule with open eyes. The silence remained for a moment longer, until Thoth approached and handed over the double crown, the pshent, red for Lower Egypt, white for Upper Egypt, union upon the head of one. Horus took it with both hands. He placed it upon himself. And there, at the very moment that the sunlight touched the central stone of the altar, the new king arose. The gods inclined their heads slightly, not as subjects, but as respectful witnesses to something that had to happen, something that had cost them all dearly. But the consecration did not end with the gesture. Horus walked to the edge of the temple. He looked out at the people waiting outside, peasants, priests, children, old men, all silent. They were waiting for more than a king. They were waiting for a sign that order had been restored, that the world, even with its wounds, could move forward. Horus raised his hand. He did not promise glory, nor conquests. He simply said, "The throne was given to me by blood, pain, and insistence. But I will rule not by divine right, but by constant vigilance. Balance requires open eyes. One eye is not enough. One must see with the heart as well." The people nodded silently. Then murmurs of approval spread. A new cycle had begun. But Horus knew this was not the end. It was the beginning. The throne, for all its grandeur, was also a burden, and Set still existed, far away on the edge of the desert, not as a threat, but as a living reminder that chaos never goes away. It only retreats. During the days that followed, Horus visited the temples, the villages, the scribes' archives. He talked to the elders. He listened more than he spoke. He did not want to repeat the mistakes of the past. He did not want to be just another statue among columns. He wanted to govern by listening, by pausing, by intention. Isis accompanied him for a while. Then she withdrew. She knew her mission had been accomplished: to create, to protect, to preserve. Now it was time to just observe and to rest. Thoth wrote it all down, precisely, neutrally. He knew that one day someone would read it. Maybe a young priest, maybe a curious traveler, maybe you. And as you read, you would understand that the story was not about gods. It was about cycles, about growing up, about losing, and moving on. The crown of Horus was not only heavy because it was made of gold. It was heavy because it was a symbol of a struggle that does not end with victory. Because governing, in the end, is about starting over all the time. Set was quickly forgotten. At least, that's what everyone wanted to believe. After Horus's coronation, the temples silenced his name. Prayers stopped. Songs changed tones. Where incense and sacrifices had once been offered, there was now only dust. But a god does not disappear just because no one mentions him. He was there, in the desert. He always was. He no longer ruled. He did not inspire fear, but he still was. And this being, now isolated, began to look at himself in a different way. For the first time, without masks, without disputes, without the need to appear strong, Set walked through the dunes with heavy steps. He wasn't looking for anything. He just walked. The silence around him was cruel. In the past, the wind would whisper his name. Now, not even that. And it was in this emptiness that he began to think. Really think. A rare thing for a god of impulse. Why so much hate? He remembered Osiris, his brother, his beloved king, the man everyone listened to effortlessly. There was something about Osiris's serenity that bothered Set deeply. It was like always being faced with a reflection of what he had never been able to be. Set was strength. Osiris was acceptance. And perhaps that was what hurt the most. Set was never good at dealing with feelings. He turned everything into provocation, into dominance, into violence. When he felt forgotten, he attacked. When he felt small, he roared. When he felt insecure, he created a throne for himself. Even if it was empty, anger now began to lose its function. The throne was lost. The people had moved on. Time, even for the immortals, moved on. And Set, alone, looked within. I felt ashamed, not from defeat, but from realizing that, for all eternity, he had fought for something that even he didn't fully understand. The throne wasn't what he wanted. It was what he thought he needed to keep from disappearing, to be remembered, to be someone. This feeling of dissolution was what tormented him the most. Seeing himself irrelevant, seeing himself without a role, and little by little, he began to notice the desert did not reject him. The wind still blew. The sand still moved around him. Chaos, his natural domain, still pulsed. It just no longer needed to be an instrument of destruction. Set began to walk less with fury, more with listening. He observed the animals that resisted there, the beetles, the snakes, the jackals, creatures that survived in silence, in the middle of nowhere, like him. And he began to understand that chaos is not always ruin. Sometimes it's space. It's breathing space. It's a necessary break. Horus now reigned in balance. But this balance was only possible because chaos had one day arrived and broken the old pattern. Set realized, with bitterness, that perhaps this had always been his function, to break so that others could rebuild. It wasn't a comforting conclusion, but it was real, and with that, he found a new way to exist. Not as a king, not as a monster, but as a force that inhabits the limits, that alerts, that provokes what is necessary. Osiris would never return. Isis would come no more. Horus remained on his throne, but Set was now something else. A god without a multitude, but with a new kind of consciousness. On moonless nights, he would climb rocks and look at the sky. He didn't look for answers. He just felt. Time passed. The stars changed, and he was there, not expecting forgiveness, but inhabiting a new version of yourself. With Horus on the throne and Set retreating to the desert, Egypt slowly regained its breath. But it was not the same Egypt as before. Something had changed. Something subtle, but definite. The rivers still flowed. The sun still rose over the pyramids. But now there was a different echo on the banks of the Nile, as if the earth had taken a deep breath, a long exhalation after centuries of pent-up tension. The priests began to speak Maat's name more often again. Maat, the goddess of order, of balance, not a stagnant balance, but one that recognizes the oscillation, that understands that keeping everything in harmony requires more than rules. It requires awareness. The scales, the symbol of Maat, were revered with greater attention. The scribes began to draw them with a small detail, a light feather on one side, a heart on the other, and what kept the two in parallel was the gaze, the eye of Horus, not just as a mystical entity, but as an idea, as a silent vigil over power, as a reminder that for there to be order, it is necessary to include even that which is disturbing, even chaos. Horus ruled with prudence. He was not a charismatic king like Osiris, nor a ruler like Set. He was an intermediary, a point of constant tension between duty and compassion. He weighed each decision as if measuring precious ingredients. There were days when he thought of Set, not with resentment, but with a curiosity that only distance allows. He wondered what would have been different if, from the beginning, they had listened to the signs that something was wrong. If Set's shadow had been treated with listening instead of exclusion, but there was no going back, and Horus knew that, despite all his efforts, new conflicts would arise, because balance is not a straight line, it is a constant movement between extremes. His role now was not to prevent imbalances, but to recognize them quickly, to correct them before they became too big. Mayat, in turn, manifested itself in simple ways, in the sound of children playing without fear, in the return of the Nile floods at the right time, in the silence of the temples where the priests meditated instead of fighting for power. Isis, still present, gradually withdrew from public life. She became a figure of consultation, of prayer, but she no longer interfered. Her presence was more symbolic than functional. She had fulfilled her role, and now she rested. Set, in self-imposed exile, was also active. He protected the borders of the kingdom. He took care of the storms, the beasts of the desert, the edges of the predictable, and as ironic as it was, his presence there was essential, because every balance needs edges, and Set knew the edges like no one else. The gods, once divided, were now at a calmer pace, not unanimously, but in recognition. Each understood that Mot was not the absence of conflict, it was the ability to sustain it responsibly. The people of Egypt, who had suffered so much in silence during the years of conflict, were now living more predictable days. There was less fear, more listening, and curiously, more stories being told. The myth of the duel between Horus and Set was already beginning to spread, not as a tale of war, but as a lesson about loss, justice, and balance. The children listened to the elders tell how Horus lost his eye and how he got it back. They learned that true strength lies not in never falling, but in rising with something new, that the throne is just a seat. What matters is the posture of the person who sits there. And in the center of it all, the name of Mot was whispered, not in fear, not in blind adoration, but in respect, a respect that comes from direct experience with chaos and the patient reconstruction of order. The pen remained light, the heart vulnerable, but the gaze, the eye that sees, would never close again. Time in Egypt did not move in a straight line. It did not run forward like an arrow. It rotated, like the sun, like the Nile, like the cycle of the seasons. The story of Horus and Set was not the end of anything. It was just a new beginning. In each generation, the pharaohs who ascended the throne did not simply assume a title. They assumed a role. All of them, without exception, became Horus. This was how the people understood the world. The king was not merely human. He was the embodiment of an idea, that of balance, of broad vision, of firm justice. And with this also came the weight of memory, because being Horus meant carrying the echo of the struggle. It meant remembering that every throne is built on an ancient struggle, and that even in power, there is always a shadow. Chaos never disappears. It only changes shape. The enthronement rituals included explicit references to the myth. The new pharaoh was presented as the avenger of his father, even if his father had died peacefully, even if there had been no crime. The symbolism was the same, because what mattered was not the suit, but the idea. Every Horus had a Set lurking, an unseen threat, a crisis that would one day come. That was what kept the throne alert. And so, history repeated itself. Not exactly the same, but in essence, a continuous tension between what must be maintained and what needs to be questioned, between tradition and transformation, between order and rupture. Horus, now king, knew this. He knew that his story, however intense it had been, was not unique. One day, others would tell similar stories, with other names, other faces, but the same dilemma. He didn't care about that. He accepted it as part of the game. What drove him now was not the fear of losing his throne, but the desire to prepare Egypt for the next cycle, to make it ready. Not perfect, but ready. Temples, which once echoed disputes and doubts, once again became places of study. Scribes rewrote recent events on clay tablets and papyrus, but they now treated them as if they were part of the distant past, as if time wanted to swallow everything up quickly, so that myth could take the place of memory. And deep down, that was what the Egyptians did best, transforming history into symbol, reality into ritual, pain into lesson. Farmers returned to the rhythm of the land, fishermen resumed the flow of the Nile, children played in their yards, without understanding what had been risked for that clear sky to be there. And perhaps they didn't even need to understand. It was enough to live under it. The rites of passage, the weddings, the funerals, everything followed the same cycle, as if life had been lived before. And in a way, it had. Because Egypt believed that to live was to repeat with reverence, with attention, not as a prison, but as a dance. Same music, slightly different steps. And so the years passed. Horus grew older. He became less of a warrior, more of a guide. He spoke less. He observed more. He knew he was ceasing to be a man and becoming a symbol as well. Set, out there in the desert, was also growing old. But he didn't disappear. Every now and then, a strong storm would remind the people that he was still there. That chaos still lurked, but now he was respected. Not as a threat, but as a reminder, as a warning. And that was also part of the cycle, because in Egypt, nothing really ended. Everything came back, in another form, in another time. And you, listening to this story now, may be in it too. Maybe you were once Horus, or Set. Maybe you know what it feels like to fight for a place that seems to belong to you, but that was never given to you. Maybe you have carried an invisible throne, or a torn-out eye, but, just like them, you also spin. And one day, without warning, you will realize that the myth continues, inside and outside. You've heard the myth, or rather, you lived it for a few moments. And now you might be asking yourself, what does this have to do with me? The answer is simple, but it requires silence to be heard. The gods of Egypt were not distant like those of other mythologies. They did not live on isolated mountains. They were close by, mixed in with the dust, the river, the fire of the sun, and the shadows of the night. And most importantly, they were inside people. Every Egyptian, at birth, carried something divine. A breath, a spark, a role. And that role was ambiguous, because no one was just one character. At some point, everyone was Osiris, trying to keep peace in a world that was headed toward conflict. Everyone was Isis, trying to rebuild what was lost with love and stubbornness. Everyone was Horus, wanting to bring justice and prove their worth. And yes, everyone was Set too, because in every person there is a blind spot, an unresolved resentment, an impulse to destroy when one is not seen, a fear of being forgotten. The myth is not far away. It is within you when someone ignores you and it stings. When you fight for something you believe is yours when you feel like forgiving but don't know how, when you decide to keep quiet because talking would be worse. It's all part of the same story, retold. In other words, in another body. It's easy to think that myths are just old entertainment, but they weren't created to pass the time. They were created to endure the test of time, to remind us of who we are when we forget. Egypt knew this. They knew that the greatest temple is the mind, that the most sacred ritual is the small gesture done with intention, and that true transformation happens when you stop repeating history and start understanding it. Perhaps that is why the Eye of Horus is so powerful. It does not represent physical vision alone. It represents presence, attention, expanded perception, a gaze that sees everything, even that which we want to hide from ourselves. And ironically, that eye was only born after the pain, after the betrayal, after the loss. Have you ever been through something like this? Something that forced you to see things in a new way. Something that took you out of your comfort zone, but transformed you. So you understand Horus better than you think. And if you have ever been driven by anger, by the impulse to show that you deserve more, to be recognized at any cost, then you understand Set too. That's what makes the myth so powerful. It's not about distant beings, it's about you, and about what you choose to do when you have power in your hands, even if the power is small. A gesture, a decision, a kinder look. In the end, perhaps this is what the gods expected of humans. Not blind worship, but continuity, that people would carry on the stories, not to repeat them, but to learn from them. Today, thousands of years later, the Egyptian desert is still there. The pyramids remain. The Nile still breathes. And you, perhaps lying in the silence right now, are connected to all of this. You don't need to understand every symbol. You don't need to memorize names. You just need to feel that there is something older watching you and recognizing you, because the myth only remains alive when someone dreams it. And today, the one who is dreaming about him is you. Outside, the night continues. Perhaps there is silence where you are. Perhaps a faint sound, the hum of a fan, the creak of a cooling wall, the timid noise of the city sleeping. Everything slows down now. The body, the mind, the thoughts, even the myth. But before you fall asleep completely, there's something important you may never have noticed. How much the night resembles ancient Egypt itself. You see, the night is vast, mysterious, impossible to control, just like the desert. During the day, everything seems to be in place. Light, certainties, decisions. But when night falls, the shapes disappear, borders dissolve, and what was certain becomes possibility. That's the territory you're in now. A place without a throne, without dispute, without judgment. Just you, breathing slowly, surrounded by calm shadows. And if you pay attention, really deep, you might feel that you're not alone, that there are gentle presences watching carefully. The ancient Egyptians believed that night was a kingdom apart, that the sun, when it disappeared, did not rest. It traveled through an invisible world, full of challenges, monsters, portals, and it was only reborn in the morning, because it had faced all of this in the dark. You do the same. Every night, when you close your eyes, you too enter an underground realm, where memories resurface, where the unconscious speaks, where you can be anything. A god, a falcon, an eye floating among the stars. Don't underestimate the power of sleep. It's not just rest, it's also healing, integration. It's where What you've experienced during the day finds a place to rest and reorganize. Horus, after the battle, had many nights like this. No speech, no war, just the dark sky, his body still, and the weight of what he had lived slowly dissolving into the darkness. His insomnia was not agitation, it was listening. He let his thoughts come, pass, and go away. You can do the same now. Maybe there is something still restless inside, a memory from the day, a phrase that was left out, a gesture that was missing. But you don't need to resolve any of that now. Just acknowledge it. Let it be there, like sand that rests at the bottom of a river, in no hurry to be moved. You are in a safe place now. The banks of the Nile are not that far away. The stars above are the same ones that once shone over the pyramids, and the silence that surrounds you has lulled pharaohs, priests, and travelers like you. People who just wanted to sleep, but had too many stories in their heads. The difference is that now you know that all of this is a cycle, that chaos comes, but passes, that the lost eye can be rebuilt, that forgiveness does not weaken, it only frees. And above all, that night is not darkness, it is a mirror. It shows who you were, who you are being, and who you can be. Your eyes may already be heavy, your body slower, perfect, because there is nothing else that needs to be done. No scene to visualize, no lesson to understand, just the sound of your breathing and the distant memory of a story that now belongs to you. The temple is dark, the river sleeps, and so can you, because the myth continues, even when the eyes close, when the dust of history settles, and silence replaces battles. The most curious part of the myth begins, the irony, because deep down, the gods of Egypt were profoundly human, or perhaps humans were profoundly divine. The difference has never been so clear, and the more you look at their choices, the more you realize how similar they are to our own. Set wanted the throne to be recognized, not for power, but for insecurity. He fought, shouted, conspired, anything to prove that he deserved a place at the table. And in the end, the place he got was another, the margin, the desert, the tamed chaos. And yet, there he found an essential role. Horus, on the other hand, spent his life seeking justice. He grew up in the swamp, hearing that he was the rightful heir, that he needed to fight, avenge, restore. And when he finally won, he realized that the throne was not victory. It was a responsibility. That reigning was not glory. It was vigilance. That justice is not about punishment. It is about maintaining balance. Even when no one is looking, Isis wanted love. Then she wanted justice. Then she wanted peace. And in the end, she offered forgiveness, even to her husband's murderer, even to her son's enemy, not out of weakness, but because she understood something that almost no one understands, that continuing the cycle of pain only feeds the emptiness. Osiris, the dead king, was the only one who truly rested. He disappeared early. He became a symbol, and perhaps that is why he became the most respected. The gods who die become ideas, and ideas live longer than any body. And then there are the other gods. Ra, who hesitated for centuries, afraid he would make the wrong choice. Thoth, who took no sides, but wrote everything down exactly. Nephthys, who helped behind the scenes, never asking for credit. Each one a piece of that strange chessboard on which no one is entirely right or wrong. And you, looking at all this, may realize the greater irony. All this history, the struggles, the trials, the gouged out eyes, the disputed thrones, serves to remind us that what sustains the world is not certainty, it is the ability to accept complexity. There is no one side. No one is just Horus. No one is just Set. Every day, you too must choose when to attack and when to retreat, when to speak and when to listen, when to stand firm and when to forgive. Real life has no solemn coronations. It has no courts of gods. But it has moments like these, quiet, decisive moments, when you feel you are being watched by something greater, perhaps by yourself, when your own gaze asks, "What now? What are you going to do with this?" And here's the most ironic part of all. No one is going to tell you the right answer. Not the gods, not the stories, only you. The myth is just an ancient mirror, a reminder that even immortals get lost, get hurt, contradict themselves, and yet they carry on. You can too. Insomnia is sometimes just the modern name for the old conflict, the old duel between what was and what could have been, between what you want and what the world is willing to give you. But sleep, when it comes, doesn't require resolution, only acceptance. So accept this now, that history doesn't have to end with a flourish, that justice doesn't always come as you expect, and that it's okay not to understand everything. The irony is part of the charm. The gods knew this, and maybe that's why they're still around, chuckling softly every time someone like you hears this story and thinks, yeah, that makes sense. Even if just a little, even if only now. Nothing really ends, not in Egypt, not outside it, not in myths, not in everyday life. What seems like an end is almost always just a pause, a slight curve in the road, and that is what the Egyptian people understood better than anyone. That eternity is not a straight line. It is suspension. It is the interval between one moment and another. Horus now reigned. His throne was secure. His people were at peace. The crops were flourishing again. The Nile floods were coming at the right time. The scribes wrote more calmly, and yet there was a feeling that no one could quite explain, a kind of silence that hung in the air. It wasn't emptiness. It was expectation. Because deep down, everyone knew that the world was only stable because Horus remained vigilant. That balance depended on someone awake, someone who, even when tired, kept their eyes open. One of them, more awake than anyone else. But even Horus felt that the peace was a kind of truce, that chaos had not been vanquished, only convinced to wait. Set had not died, only stepped aside, and that somehow was truer. Because chaos never goes away. It watches, it waits, and sometimes it teaches. In the desert, Set remained, not as a threatening shadow, but as part of the scenery, a god with fewer followers, but still with a function. He protected the borders, guarded the invisible, and he was remembered by those who knew that even a danger has its value. In the annual ceremonies, the people would reenact the duel between Horus and Set. They would recount everything, the betrayal, the trial, the battle, the forgiveness. It was as if, year after year, the myth needed to be remembered so that it would not be lost, and, more than that, so that the people would not get lost within it. Because there is something that only ancient myths know how to do. Show that eternity is not in the gods, but in the gesture of those who continue to remember. The priests knew it. The builders knew it. The fishermen knew it. And now, you know it. Eternity is not living forever. It is recognizing that everything is part of something bigger, even mistakes, even silences, even sleep, especially, or I am. Because it is in sleep that everything is suspended. Time stops, the body lets go, the mind travels, and you float between what was and what may come. Slow breathing connects you with this idea that nothing needs to be resolved now, not even the myth. Maybe your eyes are closed right now. Maybe you're almost there, and that's okay, because this is the right time to feel the suspension, that soft pause between one thought and another, between one cycle and the next. This is where Horus rests, not as a warrior, not as a king, but as a symbol of a time when one can rest, because someone has fought before, and now all that is left is to trust. You don't need to decide anything else tonight. You don't need to judge, choose, resolve. Just breathe. Let the dust of the day settle. Let the sound of the story remain deep down, like a peaceful echo, and let your body understand that it can stop. Eternity is not a distant promise. It is this moment right now, suspended between sleep and waking, and you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Maybe now the sound of your breathing is the only thing you hear. Your body feels heavier. Your eyes, if still open, are no longer searching for anything. Everything slows down, and it is in this rhythm that the real Egypt begins to emerge, not in the pyramids, nor in the sphinxes, but inside you, because the Egypt that matters is not what was left behind in the sands. It is what blossomed silently in your mind as you listened to this story, the memory of the Nile running slowly through your chest, the idea that there is something ancient and wise inside you too. It doesn't matter if you've never studied mythology, if you don't remember the names, if you got the roles mixed up. What matters is that you felt it, that you recognized something familiar in this dispute between Horus and Set, a feeling that, yes, you've been there too. Maybe not on thrones or in courts, but in difficult decisions, in those moments when you had to choose between attacking or waiting, speaking or keeping quiet, giving in or resisting, between following what you thought was right or protecting the ones you love. Egypt is this, a symbolic landscape where human drama finds divine form, where our emotions take the form of gods, our failures become spells, our successes, offerings, and our doubts, rituals. You carry all this. The banks of the Nile are not so far away. They are in your daily choices, in the way you sustain or break a cycle, in the way you deal with what you cannot control, in the parts of you that still fight with each other. There's a Horus in there, a drive to fix the world, to prove one's worth, to heal what was unjust. But there's also a Set, a part that feels forgotten, that fights back, that fights not to disappear. And in the middle of the two, there is you, trying to find balance, trying to make sense of your own pain, trying to sleep in peace. It's nice to think about, isn't it, that the conflict between two ancient gods lived on another continent thousands of years ago now echoes in your pillow, in your body that finally slows down, in your mind that tries, little by little, to shut up. No need to force anything. The idea is not to understand everything, nor to solve it, just to recognize it, to breathe, and to allow the myth to accompany you as you go through the night. You can imagine, if you will, a temple carved within you, with tall columns, illuminated by soft light, the cool ground, the air calm, and in the center, a small offering, something that represents your own search for peace. It doesn't need to have a defined form. It can just be a glow, a light thought, a good memory, something you place there, On the altar, as if to say, I'm here. I'll continue. Egypt did not disappear. It just changed location. It's in the symbols you recognize without knowing why. In the comfort you feel now, even without explanation. In the calm certainty that there is something ancient watching over you. Even in the dark, you can rest now. Nothing demands an answer from you. No god expects any more decisions. Horus has already won. Set has already understood. Isis rests. And you can too. Because in the end, Egypt has always been silent, waiting to be remembered. And now that it has been, you can go back to sleep. Together with you. The story has been told. The trial is over. The throne has been occupied. And the myth slowly recedes, like a river returning to its bed after a flood, like a candle slowly extinguishing itself. Now is the time to say goodbye. But the gods don't leave all at once. They leave silently, one by one, without fanfare, without final words, only with gentle gestures, because they know you are about to fall asleep, and they know that to do so, you need to empty yourself. Isis is the first to walk away. The mother, the healer, the protector. She walks slowly. Light steps on invisible sand. She looks at you tenderly. She silently thanks you for listening to her pain, for respecting her patience, for feeling her love without her having to explain it. And then she disappears, like the wind changing direction. Thoth comes next, the god of wisdom, the scribe who saw everything and judged nothing. He gives a small nod, and his eyes shine, as if to say, it is recorded, because everything you lived, thought, or felt while listening to this story has already been written down. You don't need to repeat it or remember it. He will take care of it. And then he disappears. Then comes Osiris. Yes, him too. The silent king, the absent father, the one who died too soon. He passes through you like a cold breeze. He brings a sense of something ancient, familiar, a comfortable absence. Osiris doesn't need to speak. His presence alone explains everything. There are things that are lost, so that others can be born. And then he dissolves, like sacred smoke. Ra watches from afar, high, distant, always a little above, like the sun. He doesn't come close, but you feel the gentle warmth of his presence, not as a demand, but as a light that doesn't charge. He doesn't speak, he illuminates. And then, little by little, he also goes. Nephthys goes unnoticed, the shadow of Isis, the one who stayed behind the scenes. Maybe you don't even notice her, but she was here all along, and now she leaves with a discreet gesture, carrying everything that was forgotten, so that nothing is lost. Set remains last, the hardest to let go. He doesn't smile. He doesn't speak. He just watches, and for the first time, without anger. He knows that, even defeated, he's still alive in every emotion he goes through, in every unspoken impulse. He doesn't want to fight anymore. He just wants to exist. And when you recognize him, he leaves too. Finally, Horus. He doesn't leave, but he doesn't stay either. It dissolves inside you, slowly, as if to say, now it's up to you. There are no more crowns, trials, or wars. Just a long and deep silence. Your body feels even lighter now. The gods are gone. The temple is empty. But it's not loneliness, it's rest. As if all the voices, all the sounds, all the symbols had been absorbed, and now rested in the back of his mind. Quiet, content, welcomed. You can go now too. There is no further story to follow. No characters waiting for decision. Just you, and sleep, and the time suspended between one cycle and the next. Now time no longer matters. The story is over, but you're still here, with your eyes closed, or almost. Your body surrendered, your mind relaxed, your breathing soft, and everything that needed to be said has already been said. There is no ending. Not in this kind of myth, because it was not made to end. It was made to circulate, to repeat itself, to echo, to be remembered in the slow curve of thought. What you heard tonight was not just a story. It was a journey. You've crossed the desert with Isis. You've waited hidden in the swamp with Horus. You've watched battles that weren't just between gods, but between parts of you. You felt anger, pride, justice, forgiveness, and now you feel almost nothing, just peace. That's the reward. Not a happy ending, not a golden castle, just silence and the right to sleep. You don't need to go back to the beginning or predict what comes next. The cycle is complete, and the next stage requires no effort. It comes on its own, with the pleasant weight of your eyelids, with the warmth of the blanket, with the sound of the outside world getting further and further away. If there was any tension left in your body, release it now. Start with your shoulders. Let them drop a little lower. Release your jaw, your forehead. Take another deep breath. And then, more slowly, imagine you are inside a dark temple. The last beam of light has already gone out. There are only soft shadows, incense in the air, and the sound of water dripping somewhere. There is no rush there. There is no urgency. There is only waiting. You lie down on the cold but comfortable floor. You hear the echoes of the gods who have passed away, and you realize that you are not alone, that you never were, because all the parts of the story still live inside you, calm, reconciled. It doesn't matter what brought you here. A difficult night, a nagging thought, a desire to forget the world, or just curiosity. Now all of that has been smoothed over. Egypt dreams of you, not as a nation, not as a map, but as an idea, as a silence that shelters sleep, as a memory that does not weigh. And even if you don't remember anything when you wake up, if all the names, scenes, images disappear, that doesn't change anything, because what needed to be planted is gone. The story did what it had to do. Make space, bring respite, offer company. Now just let sleep come. Don't call for it. Don't force it. Just wait. It comes on its own, like a boat in the dark, sailing slowly down the Nile of your consciousness. When he arrives, you will know. Maybe it has already arrived, and if so, that's great. If not yet, no problem. Time doesn't run here. Just rest, and you can too. Good night, and may the gods envelop you in silence.